Hello, my name is Skylar Borneman, and I did my report on Roger Fenton. This quote from the State Hermitage Museum sums up Fenton's work in the Crimean War, which he's most remembered for. That series had a good balance between historical and aesthetic effects to them. He was recording what was happening as well as having an artistic eye for composition. Fenton was born in 1819 in England and graduated from University College in London in 1840 with a Bachelor of Arts degree. He went on to study law, but knew that his real passion was painting, so he began training in that field shortly after law. He studied painting in two different art studios, one in London and another in Paris, and he would travel back and forth between the two. Because he didn't have much success with painting, in 1851 he went back to studying law. And it was around this time that he started experimenting with photography. I think he became interested in photography after he met the two French photographers, Gustave Legray and Henri Lessec, in Paris. Gustave Legray showed Fenton his negatives and taught him about the wax paper process that he invented. And I think it was because of this that Fenton pursued photography. In 1869, Fenton died at the age of 49. Roger Fenton's photographic career was brief. It lasted a little over a decade long. It began in 1852 when he got his first paid project. He was hired to document the process of the construction of the bridge going across the Dnieper River. On this adventure, Fenton took advantage of his travel time and stopped to photograph buildings and landscapes in St. Petersburg and Moscow. In 1853, he became one of the founding members of the Photographic Society in London, which is still around today, but it's known as the Royal Photographic Society. He served as secretary for 3 years. He was also declared the first photographer by the British Museum and took photographs of the British royal family. In 1855, he was sent by the British government as a replacement to document the Crimean War, and these records never captured battles, explosions, wounds, or blood because the government wanted to glamorize the war and shift public attention away from what the military was doing. It was also partially due to the limitations of photographic techniques at the time because they had the wet collodion and the long exposure times. It was very hard to take action shots. When he returned, they had held an exhibition in London that showcased his war photographs. And after this, interest in Fenton's work quickly faded, and in 1862 he abandoned photography and sold all his camera equipment. This is a photograph of the bridge being built across the Dnieper River. This image was taken in Moscow when he stopped on his way back from doing the images on the construction of the bridge. He took this image from the Ivan Great Bell Tower, which is the tallest building in Moscow. The view is of the oldest church in Moscow with the smaller domes of another church behind it. Fenton actually had to haul his large format camera and gear up a winding staircase to get this shot so that we're eye level with the buildings. The wax paper negative brings out the different textures of the building, which is really pretty. And these photos that he took in Moscow and St. Petersburg were the first photographs of Russia to be seen by some of the British public, and because of this, it brought him almost instant fame because no one had ever seen building structures like this before. And this was just another image that he took during that trip. Now we're getting into his work that he did on the royal family. This was the Queen's first photograph as a reigning monarch rather than as a wife or mother. So it's a very powerful image. She's in a court dress and he's in a formal uniform because they had just attended a drawing room, which was a formal ceremony at St. James Palace, in which people were presented to the Queen. This is another image of the royal family. It's the Queen and her children. And then these are just the children. This image, Valley of a Shadow of Death, is from his documentation on the Crimean War. A lot of people believe that Fenton moved the cannonballs into a more dramatic and artistic arrangement because there's another shot in which the cannonballs are clear off the road. So it's led to debate if this is real documentation of the war or not. A lot of photos that Fenton took during the war were of the soldiers and generals, and they all seem posed in it, like they were staged and set up, not really action shots. This image shows the photographic van that Fenton had with him while he was documenting the Crimean War. He needed this because the wet clothing on glass had to be prepared in the darkroom shortly prior to the exposure and developed immediately after, before it dried, otherwise the image would be ruined. This photograph shows Fenton as a posh, and he's watching the dancing girl. The man on the left is one of Fenton's friends, Frank Dillon. It looks as though this is one of Fenton's documentary photographs, but it's actually not. It was a staged photograph that was taken in his studio in London after Frank Dillon returned from a journey on the Nile and had brought back exotic-looking costumes and objects. The image appears to be a relaxed snapshot, but if you look closely, you can see the strings holding the girl's arms up, and this was because she wouldn't have been able to hold still for the long exposure. This image is from a series of still life images that Fenton took at the end of his photographic career. This is another image that was in that series. Roger Fenton's work was a huge contribution to the history of photography. His Crimean War photographs were some of the first photos ever taken of the war. He was an advocate for photography status as art. Many critics didn't believe that photography was art because it was a mechanical process, and he was one of the photographers that argued for it. His genres included architecture, landscape, portraiture, still life, and documentation, so he was well-rounded in everything, and he
was one of the few that founded the photographic society that we still have today.